Welcome, everybody, to the WanderLearn podcast, COVID-19 edition. If you're sick and tired of the Coronapocolypse stuff going on and you want to be safe, don't hide yourself in a room. Go outside. Thru-Hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Now is the best time to do that. You can get away from all the stuff. You can be safe and social distancing to the max. And enjoy your life. And by the time you come back from the PCT, the whole scandal and the whole apocalypse will be done. I talked with Gen Shimbayana-san. This was recorded before the Coronapocolypse started. And he and I talk about what it was like for him to thru-hike the PCT. He also did El Camino de Santiago, which I don't recommend as much because it's a little bit harder to socially isolate yourself. This year is about going deep into the woods. Get out there now. Don't wait for this to get worse and to die. Ah! Enjoy. In this podcast, I want to talk to you about your experience on the Pacific Crest Trail because you did it in 2018, relatively recently, and El Camino de Santiago, which you just did last year. And from our initial discussions, it's quite more populated. That's one of the obvious differences that we'll talk about. And then we want to talk about the veganism. And finally, how you, after working for Google, you retired relatively early. And this whole idea of managing your investments and your life and your way of life so that you can retire early and have more flexibility in what you do in the second half of your life. So let's start. Before we get into all that, let's get right into the Pacific Crest Trail. Why did you pick the Pacific Crest Trail instead of what a lot of people do is the Appalachian Trail, for example, to begin with?
I have lived in California and Nevada total 20 years. And the first time I actually learned about Pacific Crest Trail was when I hiked John Muir Trail in 2015. And I hiked John Muir Trail from Yosemite Valley to Mount Whitney. It's a 221-mile trail from north to south. And Pacific Crest Trail hikers basically go through John Muir Trail. It overlaps with PCT and JMT, overlaps in the High Sierra. And their hike, Pacific Crest Trail, Sierra part from south to north. So I met 20-30 PCT hikers every day when I was hiking John Muir Trail. And I was just so impressed because I was struggling to hike 200 miles. And by the time they met me, they have hiked 800, 900 miles already. And they just hiked so differently from any other, day hikers or local backpackers. And they really inspired me to hike PCT.
Got it. Now, the PCT has a system now that didn't exist. I did the PCT in 2006. Back then, I just asked for a permit and got a permit. It was easy. And I was going southbound, and there was fewer than a dozen people who were doing it southbound, and only 3 people actually completed it. It was Scott Williamson, who was doing a yo-yo that year, and Mayu and I, and that was it. It was a high snow year. Nowadays, things are very different. Getting a permit and that whole situation. Can you explain for those who are out of the loop?
Sure. Arguably, getting the permit is the most difficult part of PCT right now. Every year, probably about 5,000 people try to hike PCT from south to north. And because the PCT Association wants to minimize the impact to the trail, they allow only 50 hikers, up to 50 hikers a day to start from the southern terminus. So they issue only 50 permits per day. And they open the permit process typically end of October or beginning of November. And you have to be right in front of the computer and just click, as soon as the permit process opens. In my year, so that was November 1st, 2017, 10 a.m., I think. Yeah, and
so if you're listening to this and you dream of doing the PCT, get on front of your computer screen November 1st or find out what the actual date is and get ready to click on I want my permit button.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of people want to start in April or early May. That's the best time to start PCT at Southern Terminus if you want to through-hike the whole thing in 1 year. Because if you start too early, you get snowed on, and it's very cold in the south. And if you start too late, it's too hot in the south, and also you may not reach Canada before it really starts snowing in Washington.
Now, I'm a big fan because I'm biased and did it southbound, but I'm a big fan of doing it southbound. And I still don't understand until this day why so few people actually consider doing it southbound. And I think it's changing, but very slowly. I mean, still 95% do it northbound, right?
Yes, that's correct.
What's the problem? I mean, I realize you start in snow from the first day versus the desert on the first day if you're going north. Well, but I'm okay. So you practice a little bit on snow, you get used to it, and then you just jump into snow, you get it over with. You hit the Sierras, there's no snow. It's great. And then you go down into the desert in October or so, and it's cool temperatures. It's not that crazy. There's still water caches. There's still trail angels occasionally throwing water out there. Anyway, it's doable.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people are finding that out. So I think last year there were 200, 300 southbounders. And now PCT Association is considering, I think they already decided to put the quota on southbound permit too.
Right, but it's definitely a lot easier.
Yeah, it's much easier to get than northbound permit. And I think a lot of people do northbound because, as you said, there is snow until late June in Washington. So you can't really start earlier than that. And then you have to finish Sierra by the end of, say, September because it will start snowing. So I think you have to hike much faster to complete the through-hike if you do a southbound.
Yes and no, sort of both, yes. So I think the main difference, and I wrote an article about this if anybody wants to go to my website and you do /SOBO, so SOBO, so francetapon.com/SOBO, you should find the article. But basically what I was saying in the article is that if you're going northbound, the advantage is that you have about 700 miles, about 1,000 kilometers to prepare your legs and your strength. But the moment you enter into the Sierra Nevada, then you have a timetable, a ticking time clock, which gives you about 4 months. So let's say you get into the Sierra Nevada in the middle of June. You add 4 months. That's July, August, September, October 15th. That's 4 months. October 15th, you should be at the Canadian border by October 15th.
Right. Definitely.
So that's 4 months. Now, and it's hard in many years to get into the Sierra Nevada before June 15th. You can, but you're going to be going through a lot of snow to do that. So as a result, okay, now let's look at the reverse. You can't really start before June 15th in the Cascades up in Canada because there's so much snow in Washington in that time of year. So usually you start late, like end of June or maybe July 1st. So July 1st, and you add 4 months, August, September, October, November. So yeah, I guess you can't do it that fast. You need to get through that in 3 months.
Yeah. And also Washington is pretty steep. There are lots of up and downs compared to the southern 700 miles per hour.
Yes.
So you can develop your legs before you get to High Sierra. But if you do a SOBO, you have to be, in a really good shape right off bat.
Yes, and I agree 100% with that. You have to be in great shape right off the bat, for sure. And that is and I guess that little difference is enough to scare away 90% of the PCT hikers. I think a lot of people want to go on these long through hikes, part of it to have solitude and part of it to be in the wilderness. And when you've got 3,000 people, 2,000 people doing the same trail in the same direction, you're not going to get a whole ton of solitude as maybe you might have wished for, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, you could, when you're hiking during the day, you can get some solitude, but because there are limited campsites in some places, sometimes, you arrive at the campsite late in the day, almost sunset, then it's all completely packed, and you have to keep moving, or you have to really squeeze into between tents. Right. So But some people actually look for that kind of experience. Some
That's
people
right.
be more social.
Yes, and that's great, and of course you have no problem with that. But for those who paradoxically want a lot of solitude, then they might be somewhat disappointed or surprised by how hard it can be to find, especially like you say at the end of the day, which is one thing I would often do, even though I didn't have problems finding solitude. I just did it for good practices to get water around, let's say, I don't know, 1 hour before I plan to go to sleep. And I bring a lot of water, maybe 3 or 4 liters, and then hike for about an hour and then find a campsite in the middle of nowhere where there's no water nearby, because almost everybody likes to be near a water source.
That's correct. Yeah. So campsites right by the river or lake are always crowded.
Right. And so one way to get around that is that you just bring a big platypus that has 6 liters or whatever, and you just bring a whole bunch of water. The other thing I do is that I would never cook where I camp. Did you do that? Would you always cook where you camp?
Yeah, for dinner, yes. I almost always had the hot dinner.
I'm talking about having a hot dinner at your campsite.
Yes, I had hot dinner at the campsite.
But you're vegan, so maybe the bears weren't interested in your food.
That's right. Yeah, vegans are immune from bear attack. No, just kidding.
That's right.
Yeah, just
Be a vegan, and that way bears won't attack you. But those 2 techniques, it's not for everybody, but it could really help get you some solitude at night. In my case, I didn't cook where I camped. So I would always eat my biggest meal of the day sometime in the afternoon, sometime where it's hot, where I didn't feel like hiking a lot, like maybe 2 p.m. or so, maybe 3 p.m. And then I would snack the rest of the evening. I would brush my teeth maybe 1 hour before, as I'm walking, as I'm going to my campsite. And I didn't want to camp by the water also because that's usually the coldest place to hike. I mean, to sleep.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, cold air goes lower, elevation. So camping right by the river or lake, it's usually not a good idea. Yeah.
Right. And yet everybody does it.
Yeah. And also animals tend to come to water too. So
Exactly. So this is that thing. And so I just thought, in established campsites, sometimes bears, whether they can smell your food or not, they might go there or so. But certainly when you cook in your campsite, you're going to send out a wide call signal to all the bears in the nearby areas. And not just bears, but also raccoons, other rodents, and just say, hey, over here, there's a lot of nice, good food. And by not cooking where I camped, and also I just didn't like going to bed with a full stomach. So I would like to, have, because if I eat a bunch of food and then go right to bed, to me, I just personally don't sleep well. But other people like that warm stomach.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, actually, I did exactly what you just said. I usually had dinner and just went to sleep right away. But yeah,
that worked for you.
Yeah, that worked for me. But everybody's different, I guess. Yeah.
Excellent. A lot of times in the PCT, people have had to skip because of fires, because of conditions, snow. How was it in your year in 2018?
So I did flip-flop or skip some section and then came back later within the same year and fill the gap. So I hiked from southern terminus all the way to Kennedy Meadows, which is the southern end of Sierra. And then I entered Sierra and I exited from Kearsarge Pass, which is like, first of the Sierra Nevada. And then there were lots of snow. But I was ready to go back in, and then storm came in. And I don't mind hiking in snow, hiking on snow. I live in Reno. I'm a skier, and I'm very used to snow. But I do mind hiking in snowstorm. It's 2 different things. And because High Sierra doesn't have any road crossings, if you get into trouble, helicopter rescue is the only way to get out of the trouble. And if there's a storm, helicopter can't fly. So you're really on your own. And I felt that there was too little safety margin for me. So I waited for a few days, storm stayed, and I waited a couple more days, and the storm didn't go away. So at that time I was staying in Bishop, and I decided to just come back home, my home in Reno, and wait out. And storm ended up staying over Sierra for almost 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was May, and it's not uncommon for spring storm to hit Sierra. So eventually I ran out of my patience, and I looked at my calendar, and if I just keep waiting, I have enough time to hit the Canadian border before end of September.
Right. So just to get people to go backwards a little bit, you started in like March 15th, correct?
That's correct. That was my start date.
Which you might have been perhaps the first person that season.
Really, there are a few people, on trail, but much less than April or May.
Right. And then so that got you to Kennedy Meadows in May.
Yes, I hit Kennedy Meadows on May 4th.
Right. And so that's pretty, I mean, there's some people who are not even starting the PCT at May 4th.
That's right. Yeah.
You're already at Kennedy Meadows waiting, like, okay, great, I'm ready to go. And you're like, oh, crap, there's a bunch of snow hitting. So therefore, you decided to do that section later. What month did you actually go back to the Sierra?
Okay, so I skipped the Sierra and basically hiked from Sonora Pass to Chester, which is mile 1331, around the midpoint of the PCT. That's about 300 miles first, and then went back into Kearsarge Pass on June 14th, and the snow was not an issue at all at that point. There were some snows over passes, especially the north side. So I hiked on snow, but I did not need to use micro spikes or ice axe or anything. And in addition to snow, another big challenge in the series are stream crossings. Yeah. And in a high snow year, a lot of snow turns into a lot of water. And as you may have heard, in 2017, the year before I hiked PCT, a couple of young female hikers drowned and died in the stream crossings.
I actually did not hear about this. So tell us, in case somebody else hasn't heard about this, what's the story there? These are Thru-hikers or just random hikers?
They're both Thru-hikers. One was from Japan, the other one from China. And they're both very young, I think early 30s or late 20s. And they're both relatively short. And they're both solos, which was probably the biggest concern.
They were both what? I'm sorry?
Solos.
Soloists.
Yeah,
okay.
solos.
But they were alone, but they both died, not together, separately?
They were separate, but like 2 weeks apart.
Yeah. Okay, wow. So and the same river killed them?
Not the same river. One was drowned in South Fork of Kings River, just north of Kearsarge Pass. And the other one was drowned in, I think it was Ranch Creek. I think I forgot the exact name. Okay, but Creek, but it's in the Yosemite National Park, north of Tuolumne Meadows.
Okay, hold on, because the two rivers I remember that everybody was afraid of was, I think it was Evolution Creek, and then the other one was Bear Creek, right? And you're saying that they didn't die in either one of those two, but they died in another creek?
They're different ones.
Really? I don't even remember here's again, by the way, another plug for going southbound is that when you go southbound, you come into the Sierras in September, and these creeks are like little dribbling, you can hardly get your feet wet.
Yeah. Could be even dry. The creek may not exist.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so meanwhile, the poor northbounders are suffering through these tremendous creek crossings. The southbounders, there are some creek crossings in Washington State, but almost all of them have bridges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, High Sierra is probably the only place you really have to worry about stream crossings. Yeah, other places either there's a bridge or by the time you get there, it's dry. Yeah. So anyway, both hikers were hiking by themselves, and I can understand their psychology, because if you hike 800, 900 miles from southern terminus, and you're in the middle of the mountain, and you hit the raging stream, it's very hard to say, oh well, I can cross this, let's turn around. You probably want to at least give it a shot.
Right. No, I agree with that. When I was doing my yo-yo of the Continental Divide Trail, I faced probably my toughest stream crossing was when I got to Yellowstone National Park, and I was trying to do a different loop through the park to get to see a little bit more on my northbound journey and not just stay strictly on the CDT. So I made it a little bit longer, but as a result, I had to cross the Yellowstone River. Now on the map, you see this little ... going across the Yellowstone River, and you say, oh, great, there must be a bridge there. It's the fucking Yellowstone River, for God's sakes. It's like, this has to have a bridge. So I get there, and lo and behold, there's no bridge. And I'm like, I'm looking at my map. No, I had no GPS, by the way. So I'm just like, and then I see, looking all the way across the river, I see a sign. And I look behind me, I see another sign. I'm like, okay, this is the place you got to cross. there's a sign behind me, and there's a sign 50 meters, or about half a football field, across. And this water, you step in 1 meter into the water, you're already up to your waist. I mean, like, you're just stepping into it, and you're like, you got to go 50 meters, 50 yards across. And I was like, oh boy. So I just put all my stuff in wrapped it up in, I emptied my water bottle, blew up a bunch of air in it. I put all my stuff in plastic, and I wrapped it all in my tarp, and basically made my backpack as buoyant as possible and as waterproof as possible. Put my camera deep into it. And then I just swam. I think I left my shoes on. And then, I just swam across 50 yards. And the river was just pushing me downstream. And eventually it turns. But I got across the river before it turned. But it is a perfect example of what you were just saying, that at that point I had walked about 2,000 miles. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this silly little river called the Yellowstone is not going to stop me. I'm just going to go do it.
Yeah. That's a dangerous psychology, I think. Yeah. And so one of the hikers was from Japan, and she came to the US to hike PCT. So all her family was in Japan who don't speak English. And, all of a sudden, their daughter doesn't contact them, right? And she had made some trail family or friends when started hiking PCT. So they started posting on Facebook and asking if anybody had seen this hiker. And I was on a Facebook because I was doing research for my next year's PCT hike. And I speak Japanese and English, and I'm pretty familiar with Sierra because I live in Reno, and Sierra is basically my home ground. So I started doing a little, translator between her family and search and rescue effort. And so I was a little more involved in that accident than other, hikers. And it was so shocking that when her body was discovered in the Sierra.
Where was it? Downstream, I imagine?
I think she went a little bit upstream from trail. That's where her body was discovered by the hikers.
Wait, I thought she died trying to cross the creek.
Trying to cross the creek, but she could not obviously cross at the trail because water was raging. So you have to go either upstream or downstream to find, shallow spot or stepping stones you can use. Right. And I think she went a little upstream.
Right, but then she died before she even tried to get into the creek, or she went upstream and died upstream?
Yeah, exactly. So she went upstream and tried to cross there.
And immediately died?
Well, nobody knows, what happened.
But I mean, her body was found upstream of the trail.
That's correct. Upstream of the trail in the river. In the
river, kind of stuck against some rock or branch or something that was holding her down.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, so she did the right thing in the sense that she was smart enough to realize that if I'm going to cross this raging river, I need to go upstream, which is the smart strategy. Don't go downstream. But either she didn't go upstream enough, she just misjudged it, and sometimes that's. Sometimes it's just slippery rock, for example. It has algae on it. And so you just step on the algae, and it's not deep, but because you slipped on the algae, then whoop, there you go, and have a nice day.
Yeah, that's right. And if, you're wearing 30, 40 pounds pack, remember, High Sierra, there's no resupply points for long stretch. I think that was, stretch 100 without resupply for 120 miles or so. Yeah. So she must have had 8 days, 9 days of food, full pack. and you sleep in the river, and then it's very difficult to get up.
And what about the other person? Do you know? You probably know less details about her death. It was a Chinese lady, you said?
Yes, Chinese lady.
Same year, but a different location.
That's correct. So we found the Japanese girl's body, and then only a couple of weeks later, there was another hiker was missing. The Chinese hiker was missing, and we conducted Yosemite National Park search and rescue, and they found her body in a different creek inside Yosemite National Park.
Wow, amazing. And so I can see now why when you were standing in Kennedy Meadows on June 15th or whatever it was. No, you were in May. You were in May, yeah. and then you attempted to hike, and then you got into a snowstorm. All these thoughts about these two female hikers who died the previous year probably was going through your head and saying, here I am, I'm about to go solo into a snowstorm in the Sierra, and I'll just be another statistic for the 2018 season.
Yeah. So how can I, become a victim? I really wanted to avoid another, serious fatal accident.
Maybe had those deaths not happened the year before, you might have just had more, stupidity and just said, go for it.
Well, I hike in Sierra a lot, so I have a really great respect on Sierra weather. So,
but at the same time, I agree with you. But here's the thing that sometimes is a double-edged sword experience, because I almost got myself killed in the Olympic National Park in Washington State because of my extensive experience in snow and walking and all that stuff. And so sometimes what happens is you get cocky and you get your guard down. And so you have a lot of respect in the Sierra. You've done a lot of backpacking in it, but you still respect it. But some people get that experience and then they lose a bit of their fear and respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can happen. Overconfidence.
Right.
Yeah, that can happen.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So you were able to do the Sierra, and then you went back to Chester to go north again.
Yes, I restarted from Chester I clearly remember this, on July 4th. So they were doing a July 4th parade in the Chester.
Well, here's a silly question, because why not at that point, since you've already flip-flopped, why not just flip all the way to Manning Park and then go south to Chester?
I never actually thought about it, because I really wanted to finish at the northern terminus. It's I wanted to have a sense of achievement at the monument. Right. Instead of, I went up to Manning Park, or actually you can't start from Manning Park, because you can't cross U.S.-Canadian border that way. But if I have flipped to Sobo, I will finish PCT in Chester, right, which is basically just the middle point. So, that's why I just decided to continue from Chester.
Yeah, I understand. Chester is not exactly a thrilling location.
Yeah, it's just a really small town.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they don't have a monument. I mean, not that the actual PCT northern terminus or southern terminus, both of them are actually not that exciting as far as locations are concerned. They just have that monument sitting there that makes a relatively mundane place be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Southern terminus is right at the border fence, and northern terminus, there is no fence, so it's just right in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, that's tough. When I hiked this southbound, I started in Manning Park, because this was back in 2006 when I guess they hadn't had this regulation where you can't. I wonder how many people actually do and just say, screw it, fuck it, I'm just going to go sneak in. Do you know southbounders who actually just start at Manning Park and go? Because when I did it, I actually passed two rangers who were on the trail, on the PCT. I remember because it was like in the afternoon or something like that. And I just walked by them and I was like, oh shit, they're going to ask me for my permit. They're going to ask me for my passport. They're going to ask me for all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and luckily I had all those things, but I just was afraid that they're going to
get irritated from something. And I just said, hi. And they looked at me and said, hi. And I just kept walking.
I guess things got really changed. So I never heard many southbounders who started from Marine Park. So what they do is go to Harts Pass, which is 30 miles south of Canadian border, and
Yo-yo.
Yeah, hike to the border, touch the monument, take a picture, and hike back the 30 miles to Harts Pass, and then keep going south.
Yeah. I guess that's what you got to do for some people. Okay, and then if you had to do the PCT all over again, or if you were advising somebody who's listening to this and thinking about doing the PCT, what advice would you give them again?
Hike your own hike.
Like, there's a great book written by some asshole, but anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing I really learned on PCT. Don't try to catch up anybody or don't try to beat anybody. Just keep your own pace. When you're hungry, you stop and eat, take a rest, or if you feel good, just keep going, even though other people might stop and camp someplace. So don't be afraid to be alone. Don't be afraid to be alone. That's one advice I would give.
How many times during the PCT, let's say it took you roughly 200 days, I don't know how many days it took you.
188 days. So I started on March 15th and ended on September 18th. So 188 days, but I waited up the storm and I took other zeros. So total hiking days is roughly 155 days or so.
Okay, and of those 155 days, how many, when you camped, were you within, let's say, 100 or 200 meters of some other hikers, some other thru-hikers or any campers, or versus being completely alone? Not completely, but in other words, nobody within earshot or eyesight of, were you alone? What would you say? What percentage of those days?
Probably half and half.
Okay. All right. So you made almost an effort, I imagine, to try to find sometimes some solitude.
Well, I didn't particularly try hard to find solitude, but because I was hiking alone and I didn't even really pay attention. Even if I camped in the same site as other hikers, typically I just, did my own thing. I ate dinner and went to sleep. Sometimes I did a little chit-chat, but that's what I did.
Very good. Okay, now let's talk about your Camino de Santiago. Again, you did the PCT about 12 years after I did it, and it was a super different experience. There was about 200-300 people going on the PCT my year, and you had just 200-300 people going southbound alone and about 2,000 or so going northbound. Now, with the Camino de Santiago, when I did it, I thought I was like a busy year because there was thousands of people doing Camino de Santiago. But boy, am I wrong. I did the Camino de Santiago about 9 years ago, and you just did it last year. And the scale, the amount of hikers is just, I can't even process it.
Yes, Camino de Santiago was very crowded. So I started on September 6th at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and finished the Compostela de Santiago de Compostela on October 12th.
So about 5 weeks?
That's about right. But I took 4 zeros in the big towns just to do sightseeing and take rest. So Camino de Santiago doesn't have any permit or quota. So theoretically, thousands of people could start the same day. And when I did started on September 6th, I think a few hundred people start on the same day. And as you may know, September is probably the best time of the year to do Camino de Santiago weather-wise. So a lot of people know that. And so
the only reason that it doesn't get more people is simply that a lot of Europeans have their vacations in July and August. And so I think July and August are still the busiest times for El Camino de Santiago. But as you say, for those who have a little bit of flexibility in their schedule, the optimal time weather-wise is indeed September.
Yes, and actually, I was told, so if you look at the number of finishers, you're right, July and August are the peak. But if you look at the number of people who starts at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, I was told that September is the peak, and then next peak is in May.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Because not all people hike the whole thing in 1 year, right?
Right.
Especially, a lot of people do just the last 100 kilometers from Saria. So, yeah, a lot of people finish in July and August, but the real peak of starting at the Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port was September, I was told.
Interesting, yeah. I started, by the way, just as a point of reference, I started around the middle of October, if I remember correctly. Somewhere around there, and I think I finished in the middle of November. I think something like that. It was around that zone. So about a month or so later than you, and of course 8 years earlier. And the combination of those two things, I think, made it so that I had far fewer people. But I thought it was a lot of people. I was like, wow. But now it's just unbelievable. Yeah. But what did you love about the trail, about Camino de Santiago? Because I wrote this famous article that everybody hates, 10 reasons why El Camino de Santiago sucks. What a lot of people don't know is that there's also 10 reasons why it's great in there. So let's focus on the positive. What did you love about El Camino de Santiago, and who would you recommend to do El Camino de Santiago?
I think the best part of Camino de Santiago is the culture part. So you go through small villages, a lot of them, and you see all the churches, old buildings, or even like a place where the oldest human remains, bones were discovered and things like that. So, in other words, there is not much wilderness on Camino de Santiago, but there are a lot of kind of human, cultural part. I think that's the best part of it. Yeah.
A lot of people, though, rave about the best part being the international crowd, the people, and that. Were you more insular, a little bit more shy? Did you not see that, or?
I did see, of course, a lot of people. I stayed in hostel every single night, and most of the time I had, in a group dinner kind of situation. So I liked the part, of course, but not as, what do you say? So when I hiked PCT, there are lots of crazy people in a good sense, kind of extreme people like you. Okay. But I didn't see too many people on Camino.
I'm not a crazy person. I am an asshole. Get it straight.
Yeah. So for example, I was wearing a backpack called Z-Pax Nero, which is made of Cuban fiber, and I was kind of secretly hoping that would attract some attention from other hikers and start conversation. But out of thousands of people I met on Camino, only 3 people said, "Oh, that's a Cuban fiber pack." So I was a little disappointed.
Not hardcore hikers here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you probably had a very light pack overall, I imagine. After having gone through the PCT, that really teaches you to make your pack as light as possible, and then you go on the Camino Santiago. Do you have any idea how much your pack weighed in El Camino?
My pack weight when I started Camino was about 5 pounds, and then I bought sandals, so that added maybe another 1 pound or so, 6 pounds. Yeah.
Right, so you're talking about 1.7 kilograms. I mean, very super light, and maybe people watched you, and I know there's a lot of slack packers, and for those who don't know, slack packers are people who leave their main gear and backpack with somebody, and then they drive it ahead of the trail, and then they eventually catch up to their gear, and they're able to walk a section of the trail without much at all, and just carry a light, like have a water bottle and some snacks. So some people probably saw you and just say, "Oh, this guy must be slack packing," and you're like, "No, I actually have everything I need."
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people were surprised. Most people had like a 25-30 pounds pack.
But you didn't have a shelter, did you?
No, I didn't bring my shelter.
That was kind of a gamble, because it's not always guaranteed to have a shelter in El Camino Santiago, or am I wrong?
you are almost 100% guaranteed to have a shelter. Well, but it was so crowded, so a lot of people at the beginning couldn't find a bed in town, and they had to take taxi to next town, or take taxi to the town before, and
the one they had just spent the night in.
Yeah.
The previous night.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's only 15-20 miles, so it's not a big deal to get the cab, especially with a few other people. And the next morning, they taxi back to them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So think about that, guys. But here's what I don't understand is that I guess certain towns have a much better capacity than other ones. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, even though you're going backwards or you're going forward and you're coming to the next town or the backwards town later in the day, because that town has such great capacity, you're going to find something there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So therefore, where you have to be careful are those villages or small towns that have little sleeping capacity. And those are the ones that you have to get up really early and get in there early afternoon and call it a day kind of early and almost stupidly early. I mean, not stupid. I'm putting judgment here because I'm like, why you stop at hiking at 1 p.m.? I mean, for some people, that's plenty. Mm-hmm. I got up at 6 a.m. I stopped at 1 p.m. That's a full day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't blame you. I mean, I stopped hiking even before noon sometimes.
Right, because if you continue onward and you want to hike until 6 p.m., you might get to a town and then all of a sudden all the places are full at 6 p.m.
Yes, that's possible. Yeah.
So that's why you kind of want to end around noon and start at 3 a.m.
Yeah, well, I didn't start at 3 p.m., but a lot of people...
3 a.m., I said.
Yeah. A lot of people start hiking 5 a.m., which is completely dark, when the sunrise was almost 7. So, yeah, people start early and stop hiking early. That was kind of common pattern. Yeah.
Which, I guess, I don't know. To me, it seems suboptimal, but what do I know? And you also told me privately, you said to me that almost nobody has a sleeping, like tent, tarp, something that they sleep outside. You almost never would see that.
No, you almost never see anybody camping outside. There are very few places you can legally camp, but most of the places, probably you don't make anybody unhappy. It's just a big field and you could camp, but I almost never saw anybody do that.
Which is funny because I did the opposite. I stayed in only a couple of albergues. Albergues are these huts or these little dormitories that people could sleep in. And because they're kind of loud and crowded and snores and everything like that, I would much rather sleep outside where it's quiet. And my trick, in case anybody wants to reproduce it, is just go until it's sunset, and then you call it a night, and then you get up before dawn, and then you hit the trail. For me, it worked. And you can stop at the albergue to have lunch. You could even pay $2 and get a shower, and then you feel freshened up. After your shower, you walk off. You get into the albergue at, let's say, in the afternoon. You take your shower, you eat your meal, and then you leave fresh, clean clothes, everything, and you're walking out into the sunset, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then you only walk for maybe a couple of miles, maybe 30 minutes, whatever. And then you find a place in the middle of nowhere and you camp, clean, quiet. And then you didn't pay anything, by the way. You saved money also. Mm-hmm. And then you get up the next morning and do it, and you keep doing that. That was my system. So it worked. Yeah,
it sounds more like a PCT or a wilderness camping style. But for the record, the albergues or hostels are pretty cheap still. Around 10 euros, which is $11 per night. And sometimes that even include meals. And some places are actually donation based, so you can pay only you can. So yeah, saving money. I mean, hiking Camino de Santiago is not super expensive. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and imagining that you do, let's say, 40 days or something like that, and you're spending $10. It's like $500 or so to do in lodging fees or something like that total. for the whole time. If you stay at a hotel or a hostel, should I say. The only challenge is if that hostel's, there's few cases where I imagine the cheap option is full and therefore you have to spring for a private hotel or bed and breakfast. And that's when all of a sudden it's not just 10 euros, it's actually 50 euros or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. And any lessons advice you would say to people who are thinking about doing El Camino de Santiago? What would you say? You've given us your advice on the PCT. What about El Camino?
So Camino de Santiago is pilgrimage trail for Christians. So if you're really into Christianity, then I think you will really enjoy Camino, and you can drop by church at every town and attend the mass or the service, and I really recommend taking advantage of it. But if you're not really Christian like me or Buddhist, I would So I would recommend rethinking doing the whole thing. This may not be a really good advice per se, but because you don't see any spectacular mountains or streams or anything, so it could be a little bit repetitive, and there are lots of road walking and stuff. So you might want to do only half of it or last 100 kilometers and spend other time traveling different part of Europe, for example.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time in Europe. You spent 6 months. You stretched your visa to the maximum.
No, 3 months. So
I'm sorry.
I hiked Camino for 5 weeks, and then I stayed another 6.5 weeks in Europe, going 11 different countries. So 3 months.
My advice, by the way, in my website for those who really like wilderness, and it's not far from the Camino de Santiago, is the Pyrenees. And the Pyrenees has some spectacular mountains, rugged mountains, streams, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful scenery. For those who like the Pacific Crest Trail, go do the Pyrenees, and then you'll find that it's you'll be richly rewarded. And they also have a extensive hut system. They have paid huts where there are people there, and they might have food that you pay for. And then they also have first come, first serve huts. And those first come, first serve huts are hard to get if you're doing it in July, August, which is when everybody else wants to go. But I appreciate your advice on El Camino de Santiago. Now I want your advice on veganism. So when did you decide, when you were born in Japan and you grew up in Japan, you were not a vegan, were you? You had to eat sushi. Isn't that part of your diet, like your mother's milk has sushi in it or something?
Yeah, when I was in Japan, I was not vegan at all. I became vegan 7 years ago, roughly. So before that, I was just eat anything diet. Yeah.
Okay. And what was the epiphany or the moment when you realized, did you a lot of people who are vegans, they first become vegetarian and then after some time, they eventually become vegan. Mm-hmm. Did you just go straight into veganism?
Yes. I switched from omnivore to 100% vegan on day one. And the reason I became vegan was for health reason. I was not on medication or anything, but I passed 40s and my body was not as strong as when I was younger, and I was running out of breath after just walking 3 miles on a flat land. And I did a lot of research and thought, how can I stay active until into 70s and 80s? And I found this diet called whole food plant-based diet. And Whole Foods Market was promoting the diet because the CEO of Whole Foods at the time, John Mackey, is vegan and whole food plant-based. So they're promoting the diet called Engine 2 diet, and they had a 28-day program to try the diet. And they had cooking class, and seminars, how to read nutrition labels, and they even have the exercise class. So I attended the program for 28 days, and they even had the blood test in Whole Foods before and after. And I was a little high on the cholesterol that time, but my numbers just improved dramatically in 28 days. And I also felt really good. My body was lighter. So I just decided to continue it.
Got it. And it's interesting because you come from the nation that has the longest living people. And so therefore, a lot of people studied the Japanese diet because, well, they must be doing something right. I mean, if they're living longer than any other Homo sapien, maybe we should copy their way of life, which is whatever their exercise regimen is, going up Fujisan, and then maybe eating whatever they're eating. But you decided to reject that and go for a different diet.
Yeah, but Japanese diet is pretty heavy on the vegetables in the first place because meat is so expensive in Japan naturally. So people eat meat much less than US, but they eat a lot of fish and other seafood.
And so why do you think seafood is actually bad for you?
I think so. It's all, if you eat it in a moderation, I think that's okay. But, I'm kind of perfectionist. So it's easier to convince myself, okay, I'm going to just become vegan. Otherwise, if I start eating fish again, I don't know where to stop.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking about perfectionism, this is, I've been to many vegan households, and I'm a quasi-vegan. I'm certain, in other words, I like to eat like a vegan, but I'm not fanatical about it. So I eat whatever in the end, especially when I travel to exotic places. I like to eat whatever the local food is. And I've noticed that some of the vegan places I go to, or I've heard of, that they don't want you to be cooking meat with their kitchen utensils or their pots and pans, and don't cook any of that fish or meat using my kitchen. Or in some extreme cases, they don't want you to have the meat or chicken in the refrigerator also, just because. And I'm like, well, I'm not forcing anybody to eat it. I'm not eating in front of you. I'm like, no, I don't even want it in my fridge. Like, okay. So I thought this was an extreme case of vegan, like a militant vegan. But you told me it may not be. What percentage of vegans you think might agree with that level of, no, I don't want this stuff. Don't use my kitchen utensils for your meat. Do you have any? I know you don't know, but what's your best guess? Since you have a club here in Reno of vegans, right?
Yes, I'm an organizer of a vegan group called VegNV. Yeah, and we have about 800 members.
What's it called again?
VegNV. NV stands for Nevada.
Right.
Yeah, and but regarding your question, if somebody is 100% vegan, I think it's highly likely that the person is just like you said. They don't want to even see the raw meat or raw fish, and let alone
or cooked.
Or cooked. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It really kind of changes your perception. So I was walking in Costco the other day, and they were doing samples of kind of raw ham. So they are slicing raw meat inside the Costco, and I haven't seen raw meat for a long time. And I watched, and it was just so
revolting.
Yeah, it was shocking to me because the meat is red meat, is being cut inside store. That was really shocking to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. At first, I find this kind of strange and like extreme, but then I started thinking about that recently and saying, okay, well, what if, let's say, let's say to you, the listener, somebody who's listening to this podcast, I just imagine that me, Francis, really likes to eat shit. I like dog shit. I like bird shit. And that's what I love to eat. And then me, Francis, your fellow podcast host here, wants to go to your house and I'm put some dog shit on your pan and fry it up with some maybe olive oil and some garlic, and I use your spatula and your utensils to kind of stir up the dog shit with the garlic, and then I eat it. And I'm like, well, what's the problem here? Yeah. And so and similarly, let's say I like I'm just putting dog shit in your freezer or in your what's the problem? Right? And so once you think of it like that, then all of a sudden I think the vegan response doesn't seem that extreme, because for them, you may say, well, you can just clean the pan. I'm not asking you, why don't you just scrub the pan after I cook my meat on it, and it's no longer, the meat particles are gone, effectively gone. Maybe nothing you can see or smell or feel. But again, if I told you the same thing, like, well, just take the dog shit and just like, after I eat it, just clean up the pan for the dog shit and you'll be fine. It won't smell like dog shit anymore. And you'll be like, right? And so, and when you put it in those terms, then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, now I get it, because they find meat revolting, and they find eating animals disgusting. And so when you do that, then all of a sudden it all starts to make sense.
That's a really kind of extreme but pretty close expression to what vegans feel, I think. To them or to me, it's not really food. So something that is not food is in kitchen, which feels really weird.
Right. It's like, shit is not food, so why is it in my kitchen?
If it's like a block of cheese or something which doesn't even look like animal product, then I'm kind of okay. But if
what if I had cheese? What if I had shit that didn't look like shit? Like it wasn't brown or dark. It was just like a yellow shit. Like had some sort of strange. They ate something. How about that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Oh yes. Great. So there you go. Come to Gen's house and bring yellow shit, and he'll let you get away with it. Do you think that the society will be changing? Do you think there's any way that you could convince people who are listening to this that why they should become vegan?
So there are 3 reasons you should be vegan. And one is what traditional veganism is about, compassion for animals. And recently, more and more people become vegan for health reasons. It's really good for your health. So,
and third
reason is for environment. And raising, cows, chickens, pigs, and also fish, they have really high environmental impact. So it really become a big reason for it's really becoming a big reason for climate change. So that's 3 reasons people should be vegan. And because I became vegan for health reasons, I can really speak for that part. And I hiked PCT eating 100% vegan food. And a lot of people told me that, that must be really challenging. Where do you get protein? Do you get enough, nutrition? But to me, I was able to finish PCT because I ate vegan diet. And I was 50 when I hiked PCT. And not many 50-year-old people can thru-hike PCT. And I would say, eat healthy vegan diet.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. And there's a lot of Olympians who are either vegetarian or vegan. And I imagine you look at a vegetarian a little bit more like a friendly cousin, as opposed to, I imagine it's like if the whole world became vegetarian, you wouldn't be disappointed.
No, even if you eat meat, just increase, your intake of vegetables and fruits. That should really help yourself and the environment. And, you feel good about not, being cruel to many animals.
Right. And the animal cruelty is something that a lot of people don't even pay attention to, because we don't, it's not covered in the media very often. And as a result, and we'd rather just not know. I just what would you tell people to say, but, again, listen, I buy farm grass-fed meat or organic meat from the local meat guy, and so my pork is not poorly treated. It was a nice pig. He had a nice life. He's not in a factory farm. So a lot of people justify. They go to Whole Foods and then they buy that most expensive chicken that they can find because it's free range, whatever chicken and that kind of stuff. So what would you say to those people?
Well, that's probably certainly better than buying, regular meat that were from the cows confined in really small places. But ultimately, you are killing life, and For example, if you kill a cow, you can eat only like 30% of the cow body, and the rest is basically wasted. So
why is it wasted?
because you can't eat like a head or bones or skins and other stuff. So it's not really efficient way to get nutrients from nature.
Are you bullish in the long term later in like the next 10, 20 years about clean meat and lab grown meat, that kind of stuff, where they don't grow the head and all that stuff? If you just want to have a chicken leg, they just grow the meat of the chicken leg without the bone, without the cartilage and all the stuff that we wouldn't eat anyway, and certainly not without the feathers and all the other stuff that a chicken has. And so it's just a much more efficient way of raising chicken. And by the way, the chicken actually didn't live. It's just a thing that was grown in a factory, in a laboratory of some sort.
Yeah, if somebody really wants to eat animal protein, then I think that's the way to go. Right now, it's very expensive to grow those meat cells, animal cells in lab, but I think that's the way it goes. And also, there are lots of those fake meats, right? Impossible and Beyond, and those are getting really good, and you can't even tell the difference between your meat and those meat. So that's another kind of direction.
For a long time, I actually thought that vegetarian burgers tasted actually better than real burgers. They're loaded with spices and all that other stuff. I'm like, wow, this is great.
Yeah. It really depends on how you cook, and you can make really delicious food using only plant-based ingredients.
Right. And here's the funny thing is that I interviewed this guy named Thomas Higbee, and he's in my podcast. I can't remember what episode, but a long time ago. You can search for it on my website, Thomas Higbee. Look for environmentalism on my website. And he's a big environmental advocate. And so are you. And here's the interesting thing. Neither of you have kids.
No.
Right. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of people will have, they have kids. And you would think that I guess there's two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, you think that if you had children, you should care a lot about the environment because you're going to pass this planet onto them and to your next descendants, your great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. So therefore, you should really give a shit about this planet. On the other hand, if you're truly environmentalist, then you don't have kids at all.
Really?
Right, because that's the way you have them. In other words, if the Homo sapien population decreased from nearly 7.5 billion or so, down to 1 billion, assuming then all of a sudden we would have far less impact on this planet if we're just 1 billion of us versus we're going on to 8 billion soon.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that the most I would, if somebody asked me who's more environmentally impactful, the guy who's a vegan who has 2 children, or the guy who's eating meat every day and has no children. The guy who has over the long term, the guy who has no children and ate meat every day has less impact over the long term than the guy who was a vegan and had children. What do you think?
I think it depends on how you raise your children. If you raise your children and educate them really well, and they do good things about society, then I think that makes more sense, and that's a better solution than everybody not having kids.
Well, that's never going to happen. We are living things, and living things have to reproduce. That's what we do. Yeah, it's in our DNA. It's in our programming. So the idea that we're all giving up reproducing is just impossible because it's just fundamentally in our DNA. It's coded there. Yes, so we have to reproduce. Yeah. You and me who have not reproduced are kind of weirdos. I mean, we're like genetic anomalies that rarely happens in nature. And so, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that having children is bad. I'm just saying that if you are a crazy environmentalist, and that's one of the things that pisses me off a little, not pisses me off, it sounds strong, but Al Gore, Al Gore is the poster child for environmentalism and, global time. He has 4 fucking children. I'm like, dude, I agree with you again, that you can raise your children in an environmentally responsible way. Yeah. But it's kind of, unless you make them live deep in the Congo It's hard to raise a child and not have a significant carbon footprint in modern rich society that you and I live in. And so I think that as a result, you can teach them to do recycling, to not, to reuse, and to become vegan, and to turn off the lights and have solar panels and drive electric cars and try not to fly too often and do all these things. But in the end, if they're going to school and commuting and, whatever, they're having an impact. I mean, so I just think that you can raise your children responsibly, but if you're really a diehard, and I'm not asking anybody who's listening to this to be diehard, I just get irritated when I see some self-righteous environmentalist who sit there and puff themselves up and say they're the best environmentalists in the world, and then they have 4 fucking children. I'm like, dude, look at yourself in the mirror for a second. Look at your true impact in life. And then, so I try to be an environmentalist myself, but I don't give a fuck about other people who want to, like, if you want to buy a big SUV, if you want to eat meat every day, all right, that's your thing. Hike your own hike, have your fun. It's not what I would do, but go ahead. That's your thing.
Okay, yeah, I never had. That's a new kind of viewpoint to me. So yeah, I learn new things. Thank you.
Always the polite Japanese. Okay, so let's talk about investments. So you retired. Well, let's go back and take a step back. Before you retired, you read about something called FIRE. It's an acronym called FIRE, F-I-R-E. So explain to people who I've never heard of FIRE until you talked to me about it. What is it, and why should anybody care?
Okay, so actually I didn't hear that term before I left my last employment. And so FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Got it. And by the way, for those, you worked at Google for how many years?
I worked for Google for 6 years.
Only 6 years, that's it. Wow. So you were recruited from Google when you were, I'm sorry, let me summarize. You were working at Sun Microsystems in Japan, right. And then you got transferred to Silicon Valley's Sun Microsystems. Yeah. And from there, you changed your visa to a visa that allowed you to work for anybody. And then you switched over to Google for the last 6 years of your honest living.
Honest living, yes. yes. And
before you became a criminal.
Yeah. So I left Google.
A life of crime on the PCT.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of enjoy more freedom than keep working another 10, 20 years just to buy another vacation home. I not another, because I don't have any vacation home, or something material. And so the FIRE people or FIRE movement people's goal is to build the nest egg for retirement as quickly as possible by radically reducing expenses. For example, you don't buy new clothes, you always buy used clothes and things like that. And retire in 40s or even 30s in the extreme case, and spend your time on something you're passionate about. In my case, I love hiking right now, so I can, because I have time, I can hike. I can spend 6 months hiking PCT. I can spend 3 months traveling Europe and stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of relatively new lifestyle. A lot of young people start to follow.
Got it. And now, you were working at Google, and you had this plan from the get-go. From when did this idea of trying to reduce your cost of living and stretching out your savings come? Did it come while you were working at Google?
No, I was just like that since I was a child.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to save money as much as possible. And I think a lot of engineers have that kind of, optimizing mentality.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And speaking about engineers, how do you engineer your investments? And what is your thought process for somebody who's listening to this and maybe they have saved up $5,000 and they want to invest $5,000, what would you advise them? And they want to grow it to $50,000 or $500,000. What would you advise them?
I would advise starting with index investment. So index is basically average of group of stocks. So the most famous index is called SP 500, which is basically average of 500 companies' stock.
And there are U.S.-based companies. The 500 biggest, the S&P 500 is the U.S.-based companies. So you only have exposure to the United States market on that index.
That's correct.
I guess you could argue, actually, some people have argued that it's not just U.S. because these 500 companies are almost all multinationals and have exposure to the global markets. So Coca-Cola will, if problems are happening in Africa, Coca-Cola will feel it. And so will General Motors, and so will Microsoft if China's having problems, et cetera.
Right. And the good thing about index investment is, if one of those 500 companies go bankrupt, you will not be affected. But if all 500 companies, revenue goes down, profit goes down, then that means the whole economy is going down. So a lot of people will worry about it and try to reverse the, movement. So in a sense, you can just sleep and watch your investment to grow.
So what is in your portfolio again? Do you have only S&P, or you've gotten like 5 or 10 index funds? What do you do?
Okay, so that's how I recommend people to start investing. And then depending on your background and strengths, you can deviate from it. So in my case, I have a lot of experience in high-tech industry. I worked in high-tech for 14 years. I have a master's degree in computer science. So I know a lot about high-tech. So I started adding individual stocks of high-tech companies. So I started with index fund, but gradually I switched to individual stock investment. But I'm still long-term investor. So all the stock I have was when I bought some stock in 2010. So I'm holding the stock for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I very, very, very almost never sell stocks within 1 year.
Right. Yeah, because then you pay higher tax consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you were a big fan of the FANGs, the Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Netflix, I suppose, and probably some others.
Yeah. I like those companies. Although I don't invest in Netflix because I don't know about these days, but back in 2010 or so, the stock was too volatile. So it goes 7% in one day and goes down 2% next day for apparently no reason. And I can't just, have such kind of volatilities. So, and also, I don't think Netflix is strictly a high-tech stock, because they don't, invest new technologies. They're great companies and they're doing great business, but it's not it's not something I'm really good at judging. If Netflix is doing good or bad.
Name me 3 companies right now in 2020 that you like for the next decade, for this decade of the 2020s, that you think by 2030 they will have outperformed the S&P 500.
I would rather not answer the question because I don't want to give an investment advice.
Oh, that's true. Let's put that little thing.
If it doesn't go well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So yes. So none of the things you're hearing here are investment advice. Don't sue me, you fucking assholes. So yes, this is not investment advice, but you can still, I don't know. Come on, you can say the names of the companies where nobody knows that you're not Warren Buffett. You're just, these are your opinions, and anybody who's listening to this, you don't have to follow. I'm just curious what you think are. But if you don't want to answer, I'm fine. I'll give up on pressing.
Yeah, but I can say that high-tech companies are still good investment in general compared to other industries.
What about the QQQ?
QQQ is a NASDAQ index fund. And so, yeah, that's a good candidate if, you are familiar with high-tech industries. But I don't think anybody should invest in high-tech companies just because they have been doing well in the past. So what I'm trying to say is that you should learn about yourself and your strengths and investing in that area. So if somebody is really familiar with, say, cars, that person should invest in automobile industry, because that person can tell if one company is doing well or not, doing good job or not.
This is the Peter Lynch philosophy. Peter Lynch, I don't know if you heard of him.
Yeah, I heard the name, yes.
Yeah, so Peter Lynch was this awesome stock picker in the 1980s, I think it was, and certainly 1990s. He ran the Fidelity Magellan Fund. Anyway, he was a superstar, and he said exactly what you said. The only problem I have with that is that sometimes when you're too close to the business or you know the industry too well, that sometimes you are so bullish about a certain industry, like, wow, I study diapers all day long. I really think diapers are going to be the next, are going to continue to be great. And you may oversee the fact that there's fewer babies going on, and so maybe diapers are not going to take off, for example. And so I think it pays. I think it is a good idea to invest in what you know, but I think it's also it's good to realize some big demographic trends, and I think in the case of technology often in the long term is something that's super important, because if you look at any society that's super powerful, it's always got the best technology. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's rare that a superpower or any great power rises and has shitty technology. It just, look at the Egyptians. They had badass technology. Look at the Persian Empire when they were, they had good technology for their day. Any country that was at the top of their performance when they were doing well had high tech for their period of time. And so investing in high tech is a good thing, because it's kind of helps wealth creation. One way or another, it's involved in the wealth creation and the growing, and that doesn't mean that American high tech will always be good, but just high tech in general. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's going to come out of South Korea, maybe it's going to come out of Czechia. Anyway, so okay, so investment funds, index funds, that's what you kind of advise people to look into, and then also lower your standard of living to a certain extent to get rid of stuff. And I think backpacking really teaches you that really well.
Yes. Backpacking, you carry only something you really need, only essentials. So yeah, that's really influenced my investment style too. Yeah.
Influenced your investments?
Okay. Let me take it up.
Okay.
Yeah, lifestyle.
Okay,
yeah.
Lifestyle. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So, and by the way, this is the second time I'm staying in your apartment, and since nobody can see it, I can see it. It's pretty minimalist. There's almost no furniture anywhere. It's very Spartan. You have just a few dishes, although your refrigerator has a surprising amount of food for a single guy. But other than that, I mean, you really have a minimalist life. And I think a lot of people who are, let's say, jealous of people like you and me who have a lot of free time, they don't realize all the things we quote unquote sacrifice. You and I don't feel like it's a sacrifice, but for some people who are used to love to accumulate things, it is a sacrifice. Now, one of the benefits, and maybe we should end on this, is having those investments and having that free time has allowed you to do something that was quite remarkable. Last year, after you got into your car and drove up and down the PCT, tell us, and what were you doing, and tell us about that experience.
Okay, so when I hiked the PCT in 2018, I met a lot of trail angels or supporters of PCT hikers. And they gave me food, they gave me lodging, they gave me rides from trailhead to town. And I received so much that I wanted to give back to the community. So one of the goals of 2019 for me was to return the favor to the community, and I drove along PCT. Went all the way down to San Diego and took a hiker from San Diego to Southern Terminus. That was my first trail engineering. And I drove along all the towns on PCT, and sometimes I gave a ride, sometimes I gave hikers like sodas and fruits and stuff. So I kind of relived my PCT, days, and it was really fun. So I spent about, mid-May to end of August doing that.
Give us a story from that experience that was particularly memorable, either funny or scary or interesting or whatever. Somebody you met that was a character, who knows?
Well, there was no scary moment because I was just driving along PCT mostly. But I met a really interesting hiker. Actually, you mentioned his name earlier, but Scott Williamson, who hiked PCT 7 times, I think, including...
I think more than 10, actually. I could be wrong.
Times. Okay, I may be wrong.
He might have... anyway, I'm pretty sure he's done 10, but what the hell do I know? Scott, if you're listening, sorry.
Yeah, he was a very nice person and very inspirational. Yeah, I met him at Raving Song's Roost near Harts Pass, near Winthrop. Yeah.
So this is extreme north.
Yeah, very north, and almost northern end of PCT.
And what was he doing there?
He was just hiking around in Washington, and he was taking rest at Raving Song's Roost, which is another trail ranger's place, for 3 or 4 days. And I hurt my foot that time, so I was taking the rest there for 3 or 4 days, and I got to know him, and he told me a lot about his experience, and he was great.
He lives in Truckee, I think.
Yes, and he works for Forest Service or doing some forest work. Yeah.
And I think, I definitely need to talk with him too. Okay, and now for the next year or two, you're thinking about, we'll end the podcast on just briefly mentioning your future plans. I think you want to go to New Zealand, Nepal, and Patagonia.
Yes. I met so many people who have been to Nepal, and they told me good thing about it. And I look at the picture, and they look great. So right now I'm researching how to hike Nepal eating only vegan foods. And also I've never been to Southern Hemisphere, and I heard really good thing about New Zealand and Patagonia. So those 3 are next on list.
I imagine that eating vegan in Nepal can't be that hard, because I imagine rice is their... I've never been to Nepal, so what the hell do I know? But I imagine that rice is their base, and they must have like soybeans and things like that. Or is it's possible, right?
They have those things, but I also heard they put milk in everything. So it can be challenging. Yeah, we'll see. But I already found quite a few some trekking tours in Nepal. But I'm not a big fan of joining a tour. I want to make my own itinerary. So I'm still doing research. Yeah.
Got it. Very good. Well, thank you again. If people want to follow you, I know you're on Instagram. And do you also have I think maybe we're connected on Facebook. Sorry if I can't remember. But if somebody wants to follow along what you're doing, maybe get your vegan tips, or what should they do to find you?
I'm on the Facebook, but probably easiest way to find me is on Instagram, Super Vegan Hikes. Then anybody can send me a message, and we can go from there.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for what you've done for the Thru-hiking community and the PCT hiking community last year, for doing all that trail magic, being a trail angel. It's one of the benefits of having lived the life you live, to have that extra time and then to use it productively. And I wish you the best in your future journeys. And thank you for inspiring some people, I hope, to become vegan.
You're welcome. And thanks for inviting me to your podcast, Francis.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember ftapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.